Okay. So recently we've had an influx of new users, so I wanted to go over the approval roles in Intacct and Martus and just give some more information that we probably haven't seen before concerning approvals. So we're going to get started. The agenda we have is to go over the different approver types of Intacct, going over purchasing transaction approval history, approval workflow samples, the purchase history tab so you can look at the approval history yourself, purchasing approvals, approval notifications, delegating employees to approve for you in purchasing, and then the last thing we'll go through is Martus. So if you visit the website that I have to download this presentation, any of the areas that are blue and bold with the underline, they're actually hyperlinked to go to the page. So if we wanted to only look at the Martus thing, if I click on that, it'll take us to Martus, and click on the house and take us back to our agenda. This will help you get around a little bit faster. But when we talk about our approver types in Intacct, one of the first ones that we have, it's the most typical one, is the program approver role. It's whoever's been, whoever the program director is of one of the programs, or whoever gets designated in some of the special programs that we've set up. In Intacct, we only have the ability to set one designated manager of a program. So what that means is occasionally I'll get questions from programs asking if they can have someone else be added so that both the director and another employee can approve. Unfortunately, Intacct doesn't work that way. It has to be one person at a time. That person's delegated the task of approving purchasing requests where that role is required. And in our approval workflows, it shows as a transaction department approval. It doesn't say program director or program manager. It says transaction department approval. And so when I go into Intacct, there's an area I can view for programs. And this is where the program itself is managed. So like here we have the admin attorney program. And when we come in here, we can name the program whatever we name it, and then we designate a manager. So of course, Eric Antoine is the director of that particular program, so he's the person that's entered. So when requests are made where he has to approve, that's where the approval goes. And this draws from the list of employees. So basically, you have to be an employee of the Rosebud Sioux tribe to be an approver of a document that flows to purchasing, if you're going to be an approver of a program. And as you can see, there's only one place for me to select one person. So it's typically whoever the program director is, unless they've delegated another person. And then we have the value approval role. This is where we can actually have multiple employees assigned to a specific role. In this one, we've assigned the program monitors as value approval. So if anyone here has ever looked at their approval histories, you'll see that line that says value approval. It doesn't say the program monitor's name until that person takes action, then we'll see their name. This approval role set in the roles permission and applies to any approval where value approval is required. And so in this case, I think every single purchasing workflow we have requires a monitor approval. And so when we look at Intacct, we have these spots called roles. All these roles have different access, and they're assigned to different people, and we have one called program monitor. And so when we look at their purchasing access, one of the things they're assigned is purchasing approval level 1, which is part of the value approval group. There's multiple levels there, meaning we can have varied levels of value approver roles. And so when we set up a approval workflow, I have an area under purchasing called approval policies. And so if we look at a standard purchase requisition, we can see that there's 2 approvals required. The first approver is the transaction department, and then the second one is value approval, which is the group of people. And this one is the person that's specifically assigned to approve for the program. There's no rule set to this, so it's just generic. It's one of the 5 monitors and plus the 1 department approver. We can actually add rules, and this is where the levels come in. So the monitors can approve anything from 0 to no limit. But if we place the limit, it would add a second level approval. And so, if we ever wanted to make a workflow that had a little variation in how things are approved, like when we talk about the $10,000 limit, that kind of stuff, this is the type of thing we would do to manage that. And we can do that up to 6 times. And then you can see here, we can also have multiple approvers that's assigned that value role. And then the last approver type we use in Intacct is the user approval. This is the approval request that's routed to a specific person. It's for a named person to appear in the approval workflow, 1, they have to be assigned the permissions to be able to see the purchasing transaction. And 2, they can't be restricted by checkbooks or programs. So if we wanted to develop our own workflow that a program was going to use or a specific set of funds, and we wanted a person to be able to approve, that can't just be any employee. That has to be able to be a person that has no restrictions to how they are assigned access. So we use the user approver role in some workflows like travel, contracts, and then the others that are listed there, voucher, non-PO voucher, justification, emergencies. So if we look at the contract workflow, we have 5 approvers. Starts off with the transaction department approval, meaning whichever program's been the submission, that person's assigned manager is going to be the one that approves at step 1. Step 2 is the group of monitors. And then for contract service requisitions, we have 3 users that approve in addition to those first 2 roles. So we have the CFO that's specifically named, the treasurer, and then the vice president. So here's that contract service requisition flow. It uses a mix of all the approval types. There's no GL action or encumbrance that occurs until all approvers have approved the request. So it doesn't matter if just the first one or the second, the third, or the fourth. All 5 people have to be able to approve before the document's going to be encumbered, or if it's a payment, all the approvers have to have approval before that payment posts. No approver can edit a document, which is an important distinction to know. So if we left information out and that's reached Scott's level and it's a contract request, and we forgot something and that's preventing him from being able to approve it, he can't make that correction. Stephen can't, Myrna cannot, a program monitor cannot either, nor can your program approver. That would have to be declined and returned back to you to start the process all over again, just to make a correction to one of our documents. So just be really careful before you submit something that you've included everything that's needed. All the attachments can be viewed by any approver, and the document must be approved in the order it's sent, meaning the monitor can approve the document before the manager does, and neither can any of the other people. It has to go 1 through 5. So not uncommon that when someone is inconvenienced by somebody that's taking more time than the person that submitted it feels is necessary, for the calls to start taking place to say, can we have someone else approve, or can we get the other people to approve while we're waiting? Unfortunately, we can't. It will go in the order that's been laid out for us. We have another look here at an emergency voucher request. Same rule as the other thing. No GL action or encumbrance occurs until all approvers have approved the request. None of those 3 steps that are listed there can approve the document or edit the document. Important to know, because at Lynette's level, there's a field that we all have to use when we're doing a payment request. And she can't edit that if that field's not used correctly. At any workflow, any approver can view the attachments. And the document has to be approved in the order it's sent. So that's going to be common threads throughout this whole thing. And then the voucher role, we can just see now that just requires 2 people, program monitor and Lynette. And the same rules apply. No GL action can be taken or encumbrance can be released until both people approve. Approvers can't edit a document. And so with the approvers not being able to edit a document, it's important because we have to utilize certain fields, and failure to use them correctly will cause delays. The vendor document number is the one that used to cause problems probably the most. We have to, on all our payment requests, the vendor document number is necessary to put a unique bill number that will happen when Lynette approves and this goes to accounts payable. And so we use combinations of whether it's like the monthly bill number, the dates, that type of stuff to try and create a unique sequence for the vendor. And each vendor document number that we use has to be unique to the vendor. So we can't use the same one each month. If we, this month, used a bill that we called it all stop bill, and then next month we got our new bills and we tried to use the same thing, the person submitting won't get the error. Other people approving will not get the error. Lynette will get the error because that's the one that's trying to post to Intacct, and it's going to check for any rules. And so she would get a message that it's a duplicate vendor document number. And at that point, she can't do anything about that. She would have to decline it and send you a message to address that before you can resubmit. And now in the last few months, we have the class dimension. So if anyone's viewed the video I put together on that, or the slide decks for it, or some of the emails, we added the class dimension field as something we can see. And we have to select regular or COVID on several dozen different general ledger accounts. And if we don't select that on the accounts that require using that field, when it gets to the last person in the approval process to approve, they'll get an error message. No one else can fix that. That document's locked after you submit it. So we need to make sure in the areas where that field's necessary, we're using regular or COVID, that we're formatting the vendor document number correctly. And in these fields, I have them linked as well. So if you downloaded this presentation and you clicked on class dimension, it's actually going to open up the presentation I put together for it. If you wanted more information about that. And the vendor document number links to a presentation I did about formatting purchasing documents, where some of it focuses on vendor document numbers. And for the more experienced users, we know that budget's verified when a user submits a purchasing transaction. So does the line item for your funding source have the funds available to accommodate that request? On submission of any of our requests, of course, budget is not affected until documents are fully approved. So I can submit multiple requests that don't affect my budget until approval starts. Which means if I had a $100 budget, I could submit 10 $100 requests. All of them will be submitted. The system is not going to deny those until one of those documents gets approved. And once one of the requests get approved, the rest of them will start to fail on the approval level, where they'll get the message that there's not enough budget availability. And so it's something to keep in mind as we're submitting our documents. Not just how we format them, but the total amounts of requests we're making as we submit this stuff. Because it can be pretty frustrating, not only the program, but even the approvers. Especially like on Scott's end, where he's trying to approve something and they're getting a budget message. Now we're having to send this thing back and start the whole process over again. And so for newer users, if you're approving logged into Intacct on a desktop, we can go to purchasing, you go to approve transactions, and you'll have a list of the stuff that you're looking to have approved. So for here, it's a giant list of stuff, or you can just click view, see whatever's inside the document and approve it. If you're approving by phone, you'll get a little bit of a different list for those of you who approve by phone. It might be harder to approve. So when you get a chance, usually desktop's the most efficient way to be able to approve your stuff. So our purchasing history tab, if you ever wanted to look at who's approving or who it's left with, or who all the approvers have been, you can click to view an approving transaction. You'll see a chronological listing of it, the action that's taken, or the state of the approval levels. And so we can see the states that we'll see on the approval history is submitted, partially approved, approved, declined, or posted. The user shows the user who took the action. The comment shows any comments that people had made during the approval or decline process. And so if we were in the training on Tuesday, next couple slides would just be exactly from that training. So here's an example of looking at someone's approval history. We can see that it's a two-step approval process. We have the first person is the value approval or program monitor, and the second person is a user level person, someone who is specifically named as an approver in this workflow. And so for the value approval, we don't see any names yet because no action has been taken. The state is submitted, meaning it's been submitted to the value approval role. And then on the second line, we see pending approval, and we can actually see that the approver's named, which is Lynette. And so that hasn't reached her yet. It's pending her approval because it's still submitted to that first step. Once that first step approves, the state would change from submitted to approved, and the step for Lynette, that state will change from pending approval to submitted. And any comments that they make during the approval process of decline would be right there at the end under comments. So if a program director has approved something and they're curious why it was declined, but they're not the person who submitted it, as we know, the person who submits the document will get a notification that their stuff was approved or declined along with a comment. This is how you can view the comments to see why did Lynette make this decline, what was the problem with the document, or what needs to be addressed. And with this workflow, we can see that it's a two-step workflow. So going back to our older slides here, this would be like the voucher approval process where it requires just those two people to approve. There's a bigger workflow here. And we have 5 steps. We have a transaction department approval, a value approval, and 3 different user level steps. So we have 5 total approvals needed in this document. In this one, we can see in the first line that some action has been taken. So we see the subject 164, which is the program's department number in Intacct. We can see that the subject manager is the department manager, Missy, who's assigned as the department manager of WIC. You can see her approved and declined user IDs in that field. She approved this document on 5/21, and then the state says approved. So if we were working for WIC and we wanted to know where our document was sitting, we would know that currently it's waiting for a program monitor to approve this document, and that the CFO, treasurer, and vice president haven't yet had an opportunity to review it. So based on the approval workflow, does anyone here know which workflow is sampled above? So this is the contract services requisition workflow. And the second thing I have is what state would the document have? Not the approval workflow, but the document itself, if you were looking in the contract service requisition area, where we have one approval, but we don't have any of the other approvals. That state is going to be partially approved. And now we have the third slide on approval workflows. 3 different people have to approve in this one. We have the transaction department approval, the value approval, and user level. So we can see that the department manager has approved this one. And in this case, the program monitor approved, and now we can see in the approved decline by field who that monitor was. And then the last one, Lynette, has approved this document. And so we would know that with those 3 approvals and Lynette's involvement in the approval, that this was a payment request. And we would now know that this has reached the accounts payable level and is going through that process or has already gone through that process when we're looking. So this is from the non-PO voucher workflow. And if we were looking at that in the non-PO voucher area, the document state is going to be closed because there's nothing else that needs to be done. All the approvals have been done, and it's moved on to the next steps. So showing where we approve transactions. So you can approve transactions one at a time or through a group of transactions. You can enter comments while you approve or decline. And you can approve or decline multiple transactions at once. So if we were looking for Wix approvals and their monitor logs in, they're going to see the stuff that's waiting for them to approve. And they would have a whole list of their stuff. They could select all of them and click approve, or they would click into each one individually and approve one by one, or decline whichever ones didn't have the supporting documentation or meet whichever criteria that would require it to be declined. If you do a group approval or a group decline where we check everything, you can't add a comment. It's just going to mass approve and mass decline. Users can approve from within a request right here at the top. And choosing either option would allow you to make a comment before finalizing the steps you've taken. And during the approval, you can come to the History tab, look at the approval history and see, did anyone before you make any comments that you need to be aware of while approving? If there was multiple submissions and declines, we would see that list building here, so you can see in the past why it was declined and check to make sure that whatever the problem was has been addressed. And so when we're creating a document, we can use Spend Insight to verify the request during submitting and final approval steps. Has to be kept in mind during the approval process, since the budget's not affected until it's fully approved. And to reiterate, important to understand because you can submit multiple requests that meet the existing budget, but in totality may exceed your available balance, and that balance will change as each document gets approved. Now, if you're a department approver and you want to make sure that you're getting notifications for requests of your approval, that's a setting you control in your user preferences. So in Intacct, we can go to My Preferences, and then on the email notification section of Intacct, there's an area for request for approval. I don't approve anything, so I don't have it checked. I don't need to worry about anyone asking for my approval. But if you're a purchasing approver and you want to know that there's been a request sent to you, you can checkbox that. You can even put in the minimum amount that you want to be notified for. But if you're an approver, you probably want to know all the amounts. And then click Save, and then you'll be able to get an email and future requests telling you that you have a request waiting for your approval. Or if you don't like getting the emails, you can turn it off and click Save too, and periodically check your approval area to see if you have anything waiting for your approval. We have that for bills. So for accounts payable people, journal entries, for the accountant's payment requests, for the treasurer, all these different options for when your approval is requested for. And if you've made a request and you want to know that you've gotten approval for payments, you can checkbox that too. So when we delegate people in Intacct to approve for us, that means another employee other than the program director that's delegated to approve for the program director. Usually we see it in one of two ways. Something the president has signed, so if there's a vacancy in a program, they may delegate a person to be the director, and so that person will be delegated temporarily to approve. Or somebody might provide a supporting document to the system administrator to update the program for approvals. So if we have a program director who's traveling or is on vacation or is unavailable to approve for the day, it's not uncommon for me to get an email asking to assign one of the subordinates access to be the approver for a certain period of time. We don't delegate at the value approval role. Since we have 5 program monitors, they typically have someone who backs them up for approvals. And since any of the 5 can access the document to approve, a delegation isn't necessary. And then we have the user level. So these users can delegate a single person as their delegate in the user preferences. So as an example, if I were an approver, I have Lori assigned as my delegate. So if I were like Stephen or Myrna, if Lynette had a backup, you can go into your preferences, send the approvals to the delegate and click Save. And then when you're returned to work, uncheck it and save it again, and then the approvals will start back up going to you. But of course, that person has to also have the same access as you. And that's only available to people who don't have any restrictions when it comes to programs or checkbooks. Now, the delegations only take effect after the change is made. So if we have Lynette in here, if Lynette had delegated her backup to approve for her, and I think it's Frida that's listed for Lynette. So if Lynette delegates Frida, starting right now at 10:34 a.m., only the new stuff that gets submitted after that will start going to Frida. If Lynette had stuff in her queue that she hasn't approved, that remains in Lynette's workflow. So it's only the new things that take effect with the change. If a transaction gets declined and it was on schedule to be in Lynette's queue, and that is addressed and resubmitted, when it gets resubmitted, it'll go to the person Lynette has delegated. So that's one way of getting the workflow changed. If we don't want it to go to a certain person because that person's not in the office, the transaction can be declined and resubmitted, and it'll start with the new workflow based on the delegation. And if, just like in the original thing, when a delegated approver is removed, Lynette has come back to work, she unchecks that box. If there was any stuff in Frida's queue, it remains there until either Frida takes action or it's declined and then resubmitted to now meet the new approval workflow. All right, do we have any questions on Intacct approvals? So in Martus, we set up the workflow on a screen called Budget Change Request Setup. We've enabled the worksheet approver. Similar to the Intacct side, we have somebody assigned to approve a worksheet. We have, after that person, 3 other approval levels. So we have a level 1 approver. So once the worksheet person approves, it goes to level 1, and that's 1 of 2 people. The primary person is Frida, and Lynette serves as Frida's backup, and it requires just 1 approval from this group of people. The level 2 person is our monitors. We have the 5 people there, and that too requires just 1 of their approvals. And then we have the level 3 approver, which is 1 of the accountants, and it takes just 1 of them to approve. We can always add new approver levels or change and add other people to the workflow when that becomes necessary. So approvers can see the detail of the transactions. They can see any added notes and view any attachments in Martus. So you'd go to the same place that people go to prepare their budget mods. So we can go to change request. So on my access, I see everything, but if I go down to the bottom here, we'll have some submitted stuff. And so like we see one for Amos Prue, which is law enforcement. So if their program director signs in, he's just going to see the one thing that he has to review and approve. And so they can view any of these things, scroll to the bottom, and then make an adjustment, or not make an adjustment, make an approval decision to approve or decline. Like Intacct, during the approval process, no person can make an adjustment to your budget mod. So if we've made a submission and there's something that's not correct, it doesn't balance, we didn't use the right account number, we forgot to include the funding source, that kind of thing, none of the approvers can make that correction for you. It will have to be declined, and you'll have to make that edit on your own. So the theme in all of this is when you submit something in Intacct or Martus, it should be right before you submit it. Otherwise, it'll have to be declined, and you'll have to go through the inconvenience of doing it over. Now, unlike Intacct, we can assign multiple people to approve worksheets. And then that'll require just 1 person to approve it, we've seen in the workflow. So if I look at worksheets, this works a little bit different. So a worksheet in Martus is a combination of a checkbook and a program. And then we have the assigned approvers. So if in map 21 we needed more than 1 person to be able to approve, this can allow us to add multiple people, which may make it more convenient when having budget mods approved, and only 1 of those approvers would have to be able to approve. And unlike Intacct, if we delegated somebody in Martus to be an approver for us, that takes effect immediately. So if something was sitting in Linda DeVille's queue for her to approve, and she was on leave or was unavailable for some reason, and she had delegated LaWanda or Anna to be an approver for her, when we make that change, that thing then falls into their queue. So they'd be able to make that approval. So it gives us more flexibility for approving than Intacct does. So to end with this, it's incumbent on anyone on assigned approvers and users submitting requests to understand how approval workflows function, when our budgets are affected, when general ledgers have activity posted to it, or encumbrances are affected. Plan any change in your delegations. If we started with a change today, and we just now realized 3 hours into the workday that I wasn't going to be available to approve stuff, and so now I ask for that change to be made, that's 3 hours of work that may have been added to your queue that will wait for you regardless of the delegation in Intacct. So if we're not going to be available, let's make sure we do that before submissions start getting made. We can communicate up and down the workflow stream with each other through a phone call, email, text to resolve a question rather than denying a request to start the whole thing over. Sometimes it's a simple thing that we have to fix. Unless the document needs to be edited, then we have no choice, we have to decline. Okay, so do we have any questions? All right, well, you can email me if you have any questions about this stuff. This presentation will be available on the training website, so you can always go there and view that. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day and take care.